Okay. Good evening. Before we get started, I'd like to ask the Sons of the American Revolution to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready? Halt. To the right face. Salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Two. Left face. Front. Smile. Ready? Halt. Dismiss.
Thank you.
Still waiting to Bill get one of those little uniforms.
Welcome to the April 16th, 2012 work session. Work sessions are an informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight we've got 4 items on the agenda. Do we have any public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay. So will the city clerk please sound the agenda item?
Our first item is Patriots' Day proclamation presented to the Sons of the American Revolution. This is being presented by Council Member Bill Lusk.
Thank you. Each year for the past 5 years, we've got together to commemorate Patriots' Day. And in doing so, we have a color guard from the Piedmont chapter, Sons of the American Revolution, in attendance to accept this proclamation. So tonight I'd like to read this proclamation, and afterwards, if they would come up and to receive it, and we'll all go down together and have a photo op together. It's Patriots' Day. Whereas April 12th, 1775 is a momentous date in the founding of our nation, once celebrated with other patriotic holidays. And whereas in the early hours of that day, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Dr. Samuel Prescott raced through the Massachusetts countryside to warn fellow citizens that British troops were coming to arrest their leaders and seize their stores of munitions. And whereas answering this alarm, patriots took up arms, congregated on the village green in Lexington, and during a confrontation with the British troops, several patriots were killed, thus marking the beginning of the War for American Independence. And whereas on that same day, determined patriots lay in wait for the advancing British at Concord's North Bridge, and during the intense fighting, they repulsed the British, who then began their retreat to Boston, with the patriots harassing them all the way. And whereas news of the shot heard round the world galvanized public opinion in favor of the American Revolution, including reluctant Georgians, and whereas it is appropriate that we recognize the importance of this day in our history and remember the sacrifices endured by many patriots during the years of struggle for American independence. And whereas Milton County honored John Milton, a Georgia Continental officer whom the British captured at Fort McIntosh in 1777 and imprisoned at St. Augustine during the British capture of Savannah in 1778. Milton saved Georgia's public records by taking them to the Carolinas and later to Maryland. He returned the records following the reestablishment of Georgia's government in 1782. Milton County became part of Fulton County in 1931. And whereas the city of Milton is named for John Milton and is within the county once named for him, now, therefore, the city of Milton proclaims the 16th day of April as Patriots' Day and encourages our citizens to honor the many patriots for whom Georgia counties and towns are named, and pay tribute to all the patriots of the American Revolution. Given under his hand and the seal of the city of Milton, Georgia, on this 16th day of April, year 2012. Color guard, please, front and center.
Thanks again. It's always a pleasure to have a color guard here. Okay, if our city clerk will please call the next item.
Next item is discussion of City of Milton Population Act changes, presented by Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for allowing me to go over this with you. As you know, in 2010, we had a census, nationwide census, and of course that information is distilled down to the city level as well as the county level. And there are a handful of enactments in Georgia law, particularly in the Code of Georgia, that are triggered based upon census data. It seems odd, but that's the way they're drafted. If your population is no less than this and no more than this, then this becomes applicable to you. And that's, of course, these are called these so-called population statutes, and that's what we have in front of us today. You may not know this, but unless the law provides otherwise, census data does not become applicable to our jurisdiction until July 1st, 2 years after it was the results were published. So, quite frankly, a lot of these population statutes actually become effective July 1st of this year, of 2012. And so we thought it would be just a nice opportunity to prepare this memo. I've done it for all the other jurisdictions we work in, just letting you know what in fact some of those changes are. I'm not asking for you to do anything. This is basically for your information only. Anything that needs to be done will be done by my office working in conjunction with the city manager's office. But just from a 10,000-foot level, it might be interesting just to see some of the things that are applicable to Milton that weren't applicable to Milton prior to the census coming in. As you can see in the memo, the 2010 census for Milton was 32,661 individuals, and with a Fulton County population of 920,581. And then in paragraph 3 of the analysis, you can see multiple different statutes, and it's remarkable to think that this many statutes are population-based as they apply to Milton, but they are, that sort of walk through the various statutes that are now applicable. For instance, number 1, just again to see how mundane and sort of in the weeds some of these can be, this pertains to the definition of firefighters with respect to the Firefighter Mediation Act. Now, I would like to spend a couple of hours talking to you about this, but for purposes of your time and mine, I won't. Just skipping around to number 3 in chronological order, but number 3, it does give some expanded jurisdiction with respect to our municipal courts to handle nuisance actions in our municipal courts. Number 5 is interesting with respect to Sunday sales of alcoholic beverages. The city may now authorize the sale of alcoholic beverages by the drink from 11:50 p.m. on Saturdays until basically 3 a.m. on Sunday morning. So if you're looking for something to do really late at night on Saturday, you would have something to do. And of course, a little further on that paragraph, that you may permit and regulate the sale, the retail sale by the package on Sundays, which of course we have already taken advantage of that by way of a referendum. Number 6, the adoption of the fire safety standards is number 6. There is now a minimum requirement that we adopt those. Number 7, of course, Milton didn't exist the last time service delivery was negotiated. Now we do, and of course we're in the middle of negotiating service delivery with Fulton County now. Number 8, pertaining to amendment of the charter. And of course, those of you, well, you may not know, or you at least may not know the progress. Of course, Chris and I have been working with the City of Milton Charter Commission for the last several months as they go through potential recommendations for modifications of the charter. Now, those will not be accomplished by home rule. However, those modifications of the charter will be recommendations to the local delegation of the General Assembly, who will then take such action with respect to having them adopted at the General Assembly level and not with respect to home rule for charter changes. The next page, again, some areas like in 13 and 16 and 18 where the city is now included within the definition of municipal corporation for various sorts of statutes like street improvements. In 16, we are now included in the definition of a municipal corporation with respect to the annexation of incorporated islands. 18, something we of course have always been doing, which is the preparation of an annual audit. But nonetheless, these are just things, these are events in Georgia Code that are triggered by our population. Again, members of the council, you're not asked to take any action on this tonight. Anything that needs some sort of an executory performance, I will do it in accordance with Chris's office. But I just want to let you know, that's the byproduct of the population change in the city of Milton, and that's the statutes that are applicable. If you have any questions, I'll answer them.
Okay. Do we have any questions, Ken, on this? Thank you, Ken, for updating us on this and keeping on top of it.
Yes, sir.
City Clerk, please call the next item.
Our next item is discussion of ordinance to amend Article 18 of Chapter 64 of the City Code, Historic Preservation Commission. This is being presented by Ms. Kathy Field.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. You have before you a proposed ordinance. This ordinance was amended on October 17, 2011 by your body, and at that point it was sent to the State Department of Natural Resources for their final review. At that time, it came back with additional comments. So staff at that time did take those additional comments from the state, and most of those comments related to the inconsistency with the existing Georgia enabling legislation. The state does want consistency. So that was the genesis of their comments that came back. We then took the comments from the state. We had the city attorney review those comments, and we did put those into a recommended document. And you have that document in your packet tonight. Subsequent to that, we brought that document to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission held 2 meetings. The first was on March 27th, and then subsequently on April 10th to make recommended changes to the ordinance before them. And they did make several changes, and what staff did is we divided those changes into what we designated as minor changes, which really dealt with housekeeping issues, if you will, typos, grammatical changes, odds and ends that really related to additional cleanup of the ordinance. So we incorporated those housekeeping changes, minor changes, into our proposed draft, and they're shown as gray. So our proposed draft shows yellow, which delineates those made by the state, The red delineates those made by the city attorney, and then the gray being the minor changes that came out of the Planning Commission meetings. The Planning Commission also made what we are delineating as major changes, in that there are changes that really speak to the duties and responsibilities of the HPC. And I guess if I could summarize, all of their comments, with the exception of one, really dealt with the relationship of the Historic Preservation Commission and their duties and responsibilities vis-a-vis those of the City Council. And they felt that the draft before them, even though it basically reflected the state enabling legislation, really, according to them, usurped your powers, the powers of the City Council. So they changed in various locations in the document from allowing the HPC to have those responsibilities to instead giving them to the mayor and city council. So there is a deviation there. So we took those major changes and we put them into a separate document, and that is also in your packet, and that is entitled Planning Final PC Issues. So you've got two documents for discussion in front of you, one of which it was by the staff that captured all the changes from the state, the attorney, and the minor PC changes, and the other is the one that captured the major changes from the Planning Commission. So those two are before you this evening.
Karen?
Yeah, do we go back to the state again with these changes, or is this?
If you feel that the Planning Commission's major changes that you're in agreement with, yes, we would have to go back to the state, because it does make our ordinance inconsistent again with the state enabling legislation.
And we don't know whether or not the state would accept those changes, because we keep going back and forth.
That
Can we
is
just
correct.
put them in a room together and make them work it out?
We haven't asked, but I guess nothing's impossible.
I mean, I would hate to go back to the state again, and because this has been to the state now, how many times, 3 or 4?
Twice, yes.
Well, but we got input from the state several times before it actually went to the state.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I mean, they have looked at probably 4 or 5, at least, would you say, Bill, different versions of this, and I just wonder how many times we go back to them before they say no.
If I can answer, I mean, I think this is the closest version we have to being consistent with the state ordinance. I think we're very close, and I think that's one of the things we wanted to impress upon you. I did attend the last Planning Commission meeting where we went over these changes with them, and everything that you're hearing and discussing was presented to the Planning Commission. That is our concern. We don't want to have another ordinance that we adopt that does not pass their muster. And I don't know whether I spoke out of school or not, but it is my understanding that the council wants this to be approved by the state as well. So we become subject to certain grant funding and certain financial incentives as a result of embarking on this. The Planning Commission, and I'm not suggesting they were cavalier toward that concern, they were not at all, but they felt that that was less important, at least the ones that I heard from, that we get recognition by the state than it was that Milton be true to Milton. And I think if they were here, they would pretty much embrace what I just said to you. Ultimately, however, you are the elected body of Milton, and what you want is what staff needs to prepare. So if you want an ordinance that is consistent with the state, that is approved by the state, that will ensure us grant funding, and quite frankly is the most defensible in a courtroom, then I think we are very, very, very close to being there. As Ms. Fields mentioned, you know, some of the differences were in some of the powers of the HPC. Those were tweaked just a little bit. For instance, the enabling legislation would suggest that the HPC can acquire and own and maintain property. Well, the Planning Commission, quite frankly, said, really? When's that going to happen? When is the HPC going to acquire property and utilize grant funding and receive loans and gifts? And the way we discussed it at the meeting was well, that's the difference between what the ordinance says and in practicality what occurs. There are plenty of organizations that can do a heck of a lot more things in their enabling legislation than they really do, because they have no budget, because they have no staff, because they have none of the things that you need to do. But that doesn't mean they don't have the power to do it. They just don't do it. But the Planning Commission was more concerned about, I think, sort of the law of unintended consequences. If you create an entity that has those powers, don't be surprised when they use them. The other thing that was mentioned, and I want to make sure, I don't need to be, am I? Okay.
Go right ahead.
I just want to mention this one more thing, because I said I would do it in the meeting, and I want to make sure. One of the concerns they had, and I know that Kathleen was going to get there, just didn't yet though, but I'll say it now, was with respect to the variance power in the ordinance. I think if there was one thing that resonated to me very clearly from the Planning Commission was that they were concerned with this, with the ordinance prepared by staff giving the HPC some unilateral variance power. They felt that that was a basically unprecedented game changer in the history of Milton, giving this entity that sort of authority. And although they have, I believe, accepted a version to come forward to you that gives the HPC that power, they wanted you to understand that they were not recommending that that be the case. Their recommendation was that the HPC not have that power and that that power be your power. And again, if you were to ask me, what does that mean if the state looked at the statute that we ultimately adopted, the ordinance, and said, you took away that power from the HPC, what will that mean? Will that be enough for them to say, therefore your ordinance doesn't comply, therefore we're not going to certify you? I don't know. To your point, I don't know.
Do we have any idea, has the state even seen any of these? Because, I mean, it sounds like the Planning Commission made some very good changes to the ordinance, but at the same time.
Yeah, all I can speak to is the fact that when we sent the last draft, you could see clearly the pattern was to make our ordinance consistent with the state enabling legislation. With this new third draft, if we send it back to the state, if they're true to form as they were with draft 2, they would make the changes to bring it in consistency with the enabling legislation, which would then reverse what the Planning Commission recommended at their meeting. And again, I'm just speaking from patterns. I have not sent it.
So our alternative is to either go with what the state has recommended, even though it may not be exactly what we want, or to go with what the Planning Commission has recommended, and knowing that the state may not accept those changes.
That is correct.
Yeah, that's a good synopsis.
That is correct.
Okay. Bert?
Ken, you said that you thought we were close to an ordinance that made everybody happy. We've got two in front of us, the Planning Commission and then the other one. Which one are you referring to? The one with the minor changes?
The one I was thinking of was the one where everything had been adopted and put in and incorporated except just for those one or two changes that they were really hard and fast on. I think there were some changes in the duties and powers of the HPC, and then they had the red line through the variance provision in the back. It was one of the ones we discussed at the Planning Commission meeting. Which one are you calling?
Well, what I did, Ken, is I took those out, which really dealt with the responsibilities of the HPC, and put them into a separate draft,
Okay.
which is here this evening, and shows up in gray changes on it. All the other changes were put into an alternative document, including housekeeping changes from the PC as well. So those changes that speak to the change of duties of the HPC and reverts them back to the mayor and city council, I identified in a separate document because I thought that those might have an impact in terms of review by the state and an impact in terms of whether the ordinance would be accepted or not.
I see. Okay, so what are we calling the one with just minor changes? How's that identified on the actual document?
That is identified, that there are gray changes, and they're in the document entitled, called Staff Recommended HPC Ordinance.
So that's the one
That's
you're
the one
referring
I
to?
think is very close, yes. Very close.
Good job.
How much grant money are we talking about as far as this goes with the state? Do we know what is it specifically going to be used for, or is this money that will be additional to what we're receiving, and will it be money that will be taken away? Tell me about that.
I'll defer to Ms. Fields. I don't know. I'm not sure how much money.
Yeah, again, it's just a future identification of grant money. And we don't know at this point.
I think to the extent, though, that we're able, perhaps any joint projects or any joint initiatives that the city wanted to pursue in conjunction with the state pursuant to historic preservation, it would something that would just arise in the future. We may not know what it is now, just future opportunities, but until we have been approved by them, we wouldn't be eligible.
Joe?
Yeah, I guess this question is more for you, Ken. The language that was in question, I happened to be at the meeting and understand what the planning commission's concerns were with in terms of the city council yielding some of its decision and authority to the HPC. Do we have examples where similar ordinances exist or similar powers exist outside the city council? I mean, do we have any examples of that with the BZA or anything else?
I mean, that's the obvious one, is the Board of Zoning Appeals has a similar power, but I think they were viewing it more, though, as this is not quite an entity as elevated as that one, more of a minor committee, and that's not meant to be in any way diminutive of the HPC, but I think it was just a concern about sort of the spreading of that sort of significant ordinance-based power too thinly across various committees, and would there be some maybe unfortunate precedent set by that? Is this sort of the first of many sort of delegations of that power we may see?
Okay.
I do, and Commissioner Langor, you're correct, you were there. I remember a couple of the members were fairly passionate about that point.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't want to not, give that some serious consideration, because I would agree with them. You don't want to, just pass an ordinance like that, or in this case, give the HPC powers that were not intended just because we didn't read the document as closely as we should have. But are there other remedies? In other words, instead of this just being a black and white issue, is there a way to make this a little more gray? Is there a way to make this somehow based on the action that's before the HPC, so that there's some things that they can rule on, some things that they have to?
And that's a great question, because it sort of goes to Councilmember Thurman's question, and that is, we're playing a little bit of a game of chicken here. I mean, how close to the state mandated ordinance can we be with them passing upon it, but us otherwise vindicating the city of Milton's interest in being true to ourselves? For instance, could we perhaps add an automatic appellate right to the Milton City Council if the variance is denied, or if a third party wanted to appeal a variance and say that it shouldn't have been granted? Would that be sort of something that still keeps it ultimately within your regulatory purview, but then the state would say, well, it's 80% there, therefore we're fine with it? And I don't know the answer, but that may be something perhaps we could explore with them before we adopt this thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Bill?
Along that same line, were we to accept the ordinance as it's come in its final draft, at least through staff, without making our ordinance contrary to the state enabling legislation, could we, in another ordinance or another power of city council, have the ability to create an appellate situation without messing with the actual historic preservation ordinance itself? A side agreement?
I understand. I see where you're going, and whether we could adopt almost a separate regulatory construct that maybe is cross-referenced in the HPC ordinance, but would give a separate. One or both of those options would probably do, although I will be very candid with you. I would probably rather see it sort of spelled out fairly clearly right in the HPC ordinance, simply for, quite frankly, ease of citizens to use it, just to know what the.
One of the other points they dealt with was buying property, as you mentioned before.
Yes, sir.
Seems to me the only way they would get funded is through grants. Or it wouldn't be the only way, that would be one way to be funded. The other way would be funded through our budget process through city council. So in that sense, we would have control over what money they are spending and where they're spending it. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah.
My final comment too is we've been working on this for 5 years, and we've spent between $10,000 and $20,000 in legal fees on this one particular ordinance. And in the meantime, we've lost several properties out there, and we're going to continue to lose these historic properties if we don't enact some legislation here to deal with this process. And I would recommend personally that we accept the marked up version that staff has come up with. And let's move forward with this. I think the scope and the realm of the historic districts, historic properties out there is very discrete. I think if you look at it, there's probably 3 distinct historic districts. You're going to have some historic, isolated historic properties out there, but I think their purview is going to be fairly restricted and limited in what they're going to deal with. My personal opinion, anyways. And I think as this process moves along, and it's not going to move along swiftly either. We've seen how swiftly it's moved along in the last 5 years. So I wouldn't be overly concerned that they're going to go out there and spend millions of dollars and create some undue hardships on property owners and creating onerous conditions on these historic districts. I think we've shown in the past with the residents of this city, particularly specifically in Crabapple, that we can work together, and we need to work together to preserve these historic properties and hopefully create an historic district, which is going to enhance, I think, the value and the appearance of our city itself. And hopefully that's where our city center is going to end up ultimately. That's my 2 pence.
Karen?
Is there a way to just speak with someone at the state to find out whether or not they would consider any of these minor, and we could go ahead and have them made, rather than having to go through their whole long review process, which we know will take another, seems like 6 months or so every time they...
It is a 30-day process. They do have attorneys on staff, and one of the reasons it takes 30 days is because they want us to send over a hard copy. We have to mail over a hard copy of it, as well as email a digital copy, and then they have 30 days to make the review, which includes the staff, plus which includes legal assistance as well as part of that review. So I'm not sure we can, they're very short-staffed, so they adhere to that 30 days. I'm not sure we could get a shorter time frame than that 30 days.
What if we pass staff's recommended, which I believe is staff and the state are basically come to an agreement on one, and then started looking at the other changes and put those through to see if we could get the state to agree to them, and adopted those as changes to the ordinance after the fact, so that way at least we would have something in place. Would that
Certainly.
work?
Absolutely.
That's a great idea. Go ahead and just to get something adopted, get it in place, and then almost yield like approve like a recommended modifications and send that to them in written form. But it's not our ordinance. It's simply, yeah.
And let them look over and see if they will agree with some of those, and that way we can get the ordinance passed in place, and then we can try to make it to really the way we want it to look. Because it looks like this, like I said, the Planning Commission does have some very good points.
I agree.
That we would like to have done if we can get the state to agree to them.
Anybody else have any comments or questions on this? Okay. Do we need any direction or anything on
No,
this?
sir. We got the direction.
Thank you very much.
Okay, will the city clerk please call the next item?
Our next item is discussion of the draft Highway 9, Georgia 400 Livable Center Initiative, LCI plan. This is being presented by Ms. Michelle McIntosh Ross.
Yes, Michelle is here with members of the consulting team to review with you the final draft for the LCI for the Highway 9 Deerfield area. Michelle.
Hi, good evening. We've been working on the LCI plan since August 2011, gathering data and meeting with staff and stakeholders, and we hosted 4 public workshops and exercises throughout the time period. We presented the draft to the council at a joint work session on March 12th, so that was your first hearing of it. We presented again at the Planning Commission's meeting on March 27th. The draft document was available online April 5th, and we went to another Planning Commission's meeting on April 10th, where we got a favorable recommendation to take to council with some changes, which we have. We also met on April 12th with ARC and GDOT and MARTA and so on, and we got some additional information from them. They loved the plan, so we're pretty much moving forward with that. Tonight, we just wanted to come again to have an additional public forum to present the draft plan, just to make you guys more comfortable with the contents of the plan, so that when we approach next week with our resolution requesting adoption, everybody will feel comfortable with the draft documents. So tonight is our last presentation with the consultants. So if you have any comments, questions, you can ask it now. You have the draft plan in your packets tonight, and so I'll turn it over to Eric, who will give you an overview of the draft plan.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'm just going to take just a brief moment or two and hit the highlights here. The first 96 pages of the plan are the hour that we spent last month going through all the existing conditions, all of the land use and development concepts. What I would call your attention to is that following the first 96 pages, then we get into a lot of the substantive information that some of you all and the planning commissioners asked about, in terms of design standards, architectural standards, site design standards, landscape standards, opportunities for transfer of development rights. All of that is at the very end of Part 2, the concept plan, beginning on page 97. And then the entire third part is the action plan, where it spells out the 5-year action plan. And that includes the table on page 113, of which we are providing an updated copy. Michelle mentioned that we met with ARC staff, Greta, MARTA, and GDOT, all those organizations with acronyms as their names, last Thursday. And so there were a few changes and updates to the action plan that are reflected on this much larger copy that probably still is a little small to read, but much better than 8.5 by 11, or at least a little better than 8.5 by 11. And this chart is fundamental to the document. This is a chart that you will use hopefully throughout the next 5 years. Anytime you go to ARC to ask for additional funds, to ask for cooperation from them, to ask for their assistance on an initiative, they will refer to a version of this chart which will show what you have accomplished in terms of the LCI plan, what were the projects and the initiatives that were outlined as part of the plan that may require funding assistance, and so they will look for projects on this list, both to see if what you are requesting is consistent with this list and if you have fulfilled any of the opportunities that are here. That's the reason why a lot of those projects at the top of the list in gray are already projects that you are working on or have funded or are moving forward with. It's also the reason that at the very bottom under other local initiatives, there are a series of follow-up efforts, studies, ideas, initiatives. ARC last Thursday encouraged us to put as many opportunities as we could think of from the plan on there so that it gives you the greatest flexibility and funding opportunity moving forward, depending on what you as a counseling community see fit. So this page and this chart is important. It will be page 113, an update to page 113 in the document. And then the next 30 pages continue to outline details on these projects, on opportunities and initiatives moving forward that are in line with the plan in terms of commercial development, residential development, the LCI goals, as well as about 6 to 8 pages of zoning recommendations for each of the sub-areas within the plan. So that hopefully just gives you a little bit of orientation and update based on where we've been over the last 4 weeks. And we'll be happy to answer any questions. Myself, Gabe Presley, who knows this document better than any of us, and Christina Pastor, who's been helping us with the transportation and transit component.
Open it up if there's any questions, comments. Lance?
I mean, it's really hard to ask any questions until we've had time to really review the document.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
It looks like y'all put a lot of time and energy into it, and I appreciate it.
And we appreciate the diligence of your planning commission as well. That was one of the more thorough reviews of an LCI plan that we've had, but I think it was very helpful in making sure the text was in good shape.
And this document here is what will help us to try to go after some matching funds and everything else.
Absolutely.
In order to actually accomplish some of the things that are on here.
Yes, I mean, hopefully that lays out the kind of the game plan moving forward, but also anytime you send an application now to ARC, they will ask for a table of accomplishments, which will be based to some degree on that table. So it is sort of the instruction plan moving forward.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other council discussion or comments? Chris? Okay. We'll adjourn this meeting, and 7 o'clock we'll open back up for our town hall meeting.